While Rimworld allows us to be very creative when it comes to blowing our enemies to pieces, I've always wondered if it's possible to defeat our enemies using stealth. While Rimworld contains no stealth mechanics in any way, shape or form, if you download Vanilla Weapons Expanded, then you would see that there's some throwing knives included with the mod. So if we've got some ninja type stealth weapons and we've got some people to kill, even though we strictly speaking don't have any way of being stealthy, if we throw knives at people and try not to get caught, isn't that basically what a ninja does anyway? Isn't that basically stealth anyway? I figured these knives probably wouldn't be very strong if we just made them from base game materials. So I decided to construct some throwing knives using nanotechnology. I gifted the first pair of throwing knives we constructed to Vikinger, as he seemed a reliable person to test them out. I fully expected these things to be ridiculously OP, like picking up a bullet and throwing it into someone's chest. And while their statistics don't really look all that fearsome, as soon as we started testing them out on some wild animals, it quickly became obvious that they're not the easiest weapons to use. They are pretty much cursed by a laughably short range, as well as being arguably more inaccurate than a gun. And while I doubt they're going to replace conventional weapons at any time soon, when you throw enough knives into a single living target, eventually they will fall. So despite their drawbacks, it seems that these nanomachinery throwing knives are almost a weapon to be feared. But if our stealth assassin squad is going to graduate from throwing knives at animals, they're going to have to prove they can kill some people with these throwing knives. And what better way could we test Vikinger's squad's killing power than by stabbing up some prisoners? Is it stabbing if you threw the knife at them? I'm not sure. Either way, it seems to get the job done. With all of our prisoners either bleeding to death or dead, I decided to send our newly formed stealth assassin squad on a mission that would test their newly formed skills to the very limit. I packed Vikinger, Brendan and Grim into some transport pods, and then I set my sights on finding them a target. While the number of settlements and colonies I've destroyed is truly beyond counting, I haven't really destroyed all that many cities. Since I installed the Rimcities mod, I don't think I've given it the attention it deserves. It basically adds these cities onto the map, which are much larger than your regular settlements. While they're quite similar to your run-of-the-mill settlements, they tend to contain massive populations and huge hordes of wealth. We're talking upwards of 60 pawns, and enough technology and resources to start your own base. While our stealth assassin squad was very much eager to plunder the city and all held within, the game just didn't seem to want these transport pods to land in the city. What is with this glitch? So instead we dropped just one tile away, and I had our guys walk the rest of the way so that they could sneak on to the edge of the enemy map. As soon as our guys arrived at the city, we quickly got an idea of just how huge the place was. There seemed to be a bunch of locals wandering about the streets, and I didn't like the look of them one bit. I ordered Vikinger's squad to hold position, and to keep their trusty throwing knives at the ready. The enemy inhabiting the city seemed to be spread out far and wide. While taking on this many defenders using only throwing knives sounds a bit like suicide, it didn't look like they could really mount much of a defense if we decided to go after them one by one. If we stalk our prey in the dark alleys of their city, then we might be able to pick them off individually without any of them raising the alarm. Just as we had made our plans, an armoured sentry headed our way. We had been here one whole minute before our cover was blown, and as the sentry headed our way, our deadly assassination squad was forced to defend itself. Brendan brought down the killing blow, silencing the only witness to our invasion with a single thrust of his knife. It looks like Brendan ripped the guy's leg off, but because I didn't want our guys getting arrested, I sent our guys to go hide in a random building. While we were waiting to lose our wanted stars, I thought it was a good idea to give this place a bit of an explore. And as we progressed further into the building, we eventually uncovered this weird room with a puma and a dead body. Seeing as our stealth assassin squad was adept at fighting animals, Vikinger's guys couldn't find any reason not to stab that puma. A brief medical examination showed how the puma's brain had been destroyed with throwing knives. Vikinger's squad bravely ventured deeper into the building, where they were greeted by the sight of a psychic animal pulsar. It looked like the locals really didn't want us to have this, so to show them our spite, we activated the psychic animal pulsar. And what had started as an innocent afternoon of throwing knives at strangers suddenly began to turn into Manhunter Deathmatch, and as our guys stealthily assassinated this psychotic Labrador, the entire city seemed to erupt in total chaos. As a chef held off deadly predators with nothing but stun grenades, small Manhunter packs roved the streets like gangs, destroying all who they faced. Every citizen that tried to defend themselves found themselves totally and completely outnumbered, their laughable acts of defiance ignored by the ever-advancing horde. And as quickly as these animals had turned hostile, they seemed to have killed or wounded every single defender living inside of the city. Without anybody left to assassinate, it could be difficult for our stealth squad to properly demonstrate their killing skills. But as luck would have it, it looked like one colonist was still left alive. But before the stealth squad could reach them, the last surviving citizen seemed to wander face first into a horde of angry manhunters. So it looked like our guys weren't going to get to be stealth assassins after all. Our guys found themselves pinned down in the streets by a never-ending piecemeal assault by angry manhunters. As they fought through the back alleys against weird modded animals, our stealth squad arrived at this clearing which looked to be safe. If our stealth squad was to stand any chance of surviving the animal onslaught, then they were going to need all the help they could get. I sent the stealth squad enough supplies so that they could build a small base, as well as 4 auto cluster mortars to help level the playing field. Just as they were about to start building, Vikinger's squad was assaulted by what looked to be a hippo. But as our squad adopted a more defensive position, it was only a matter of time until the approaching manhunters would be perforated by throwing knives. The stealth squad held position while I began building our base. But then, all of a sudden, I swear I could hear a tornado. My best guess is that Vikinger and his guys killed a random modded animal that creates a tornado upon death. But as our stealth squad held their position against some more weird looking modded animals, the tornado seemed to be heading in the opposite direction from our guys. I wasted no time setting up a power source for our base. After setting down a perimeter wall and a door, I decided to let our stealth squad have some time off. Seeing as they had been drafted all day, Grim immediately fell asleep on the floor. Brendan got straight to murdering the last man hunting chicken, while Vikinger skulked off to a random office building and passed out on the floor. After a brief power blackout, our guys took to their feet and quickly threw together a base. We quickly cleared away these animal corpses before they could stink up the place, moving them to a dedicated dumping zone just to the north of the base. With all the enemy colonists long since dead, I decided to crank call some tribals so that our guys might actually have someone to fight. And while we were waiting for that raid to show up, Vikinger and Grim decided it was the right time to get even more sleep. Just as I was placing the blueprints for the auto cluster mortars, a raiding party of tribals spawned onto the north side of the map. By the looks of those falling mortar shells, it seems like our guys have finally decided to wake up and get some work done. Despite getting the mortars built just in the nick of time, that didn't change the fact that these mortars are ridiculously inaccurate. With the tribals quickly closing the gap to our base, due to the mortar's long minimum range, it looked like Vikinger and Grim would only have throwing knives to defend themselves against an entire raid. And as the mortars picked off any random stragglers, I suddenly noticed that Brendan was trapped on the other side of the city, surrounded by enemies on all sides. And as Brendan tried his best to shake his pursuers, he quickly found himself cornered and outnumbered. But before the tribals could cause any lasting harm, a glorious storm of artillery shells was here to save the day, driving the unwashed tribals away like rats. Back at the base, it looked like the peasant assault was struggling to gain momentum. A few of these tribals even walked out of the minimum range of the artillery, taking hits from the big guns as they ran around like headless chickens. Brendan arrived at the base in style, stabbing up a random tribal as he helped to bolster the base's defense. And as the tribals continued their piecemeal assault of our base, the auto cluster mortars seemed to be having a pretty good time. As artillery shells pounded random tribals, the last peasant standing to be stupid enough to try and attack our base was quickly put down by Brendan's unstoppable combat prowess. Our deadly combination of artillery shells and throwing knives seemed to have made the tribals a bit scared, and as they were trying to run away like cowards, our artillery shells mercilessly shelled them as they tried to escape. Seeing the enemy in full flight, the stealth assassin squad sallied forth, and as Grim handed out justice to a fleeing tribal, the auto mortars were still picking targets and hurling shells, leaving our enemy to desperately scurry towards the edge of the map. But without any sort of cover, these tribals didn't stand a chance of making it to safety. As soon as the battle was over, Grim went to sleep on the enemy's corpses, and as Grim caught up on his sleep, Brendan stayed busy by shifting some corpses. With all of this base building and artillery usage, it would be difficult to argue that this mission was in any way stealthy. So seeing as our objective had changed to complete conquest of the city, Vikinger focused his attention on this large complex at the center of the city. These two large buildings contained lots of individual smaller rooms, and as Vikinger made his way through the structure, I couldn't help but think that it would be pretty cool to blow this entire place sky high. I mean, you can't really conquer a city without first blowing up a few buildings, right? After all, it's not just about killing the inhabitants, it's about sending a message to everybody who might try and follow their example. But before we could perform our strategic detonations, I decided to resupply the stealth squad with some much needed supplies and slaves. I shored up the last holes in our base's defences, and then I set up a row of beds so that our stealth squad might finally have a decent night's sleep. While the slaves spent the night making our base a bit more presentable, I made final preparations for the launch of over 100 anti-grain pods. As we launched our super weapon, a wave of over 100 transport pods came crashing through the roof of this large complex of structures, inundating every single surface of every single room with high explosive death. It would seem slightly wasteful to detonate this many explosives and not kill anyone in the process, so I decided the right course of action was to call in yet another raid, and at the same time, I ordered the slaves to head towards the building that was packed with explosives. With some trepidation, our slaves headed across the city, and just as they were closing in on the explosive structure, the raiders arrived on the eastern side of the map, where they quickly seemed to catch the scent of our slaves. And as Gerbil and Monkey eventually arrived at the center of the complex, they did look a bit uncomfortable to be surrounded by this many explosives. But with that tribal raiding party closing in, it seems that Gerbil and Monkey's problems in life would soon be at an end. And as Monkey did his very best to hold off the oncoming horde single-handedly, Gerbil pulled out an orbital power beam targeter and aimed it at his feet. As the scorching pillar of light descended from the sky, the beam instantaneously triggered dozens of anti-grain shells, creating a blinding flash and a devastating blast that wiped out any buildings or peasants that stood in its way. The explosion had been so huge that it even managed to uncover an ancient shrine. As the ancients awoke from their cryosleep pods, they were ambushed by random mechanoids. I switched off the cluster mortars before they could fire, so that Vikinger's squad could take on the threat a bit more directly. And as the stealth squad unloaded their bullet storms upon the mechanoid menace, the robotic threat was quickly put down, leaving Vikinger's squad to decide the fate of the downed ancients that had just awoken from their slumber. I have to say that I'm pretty impressed by what Gerbil managed to accomplish. While I've used boom rats and even boomer loops to trigger these detonations in the past, I've learned that if you're willing to sacrifice a slave, you tend to have much more control over the outcome of the detonation. With the rest of the city lying in ruins and abandoned, I decided to execute the last of the ancients still left alive. And as the rocket launchers tore apart the last of the ancient shrine, it looked like this city was finally totally destroyed. And with that, our mission was complete. And even though some eagle-eyed observers might point out that our mission was actually a failure from the start, seeing as we never really managed to stealthily assassinate anyone, with an entire population put to the sword and a city in flames, I would definitely say that our plan to assassinate an entire city had been a complete success. As the stealth squad returned home as heroes, I had them drop directly through the ceiling of the rec room, so our heroic champions could get straight to enjoying some biffers. I definitely think that Brendan wins the MVP for this one, and while I'm sure our champions would love to relax after a hard day of warcriming, before they pass out in a big pile of illicit substances, I think that we've just got one more warcrime to do. I've never seen much point in these Imperial traders. All they do is show up and tell me off for not being part of the Empire. So instead of telling them to go away politely, I sent in Vikinger's deadly assassination squad. And as they took up their super secret positions, they started hurling their knives in the general direction of these annoying traders. And as the Imperials became hostile, they found themselves at the center of a deadly trap, being hosed from all directions and taking heavy fire from a combination of tasers and lasers. And as we downed the last of their pack animals, we dragged the burning survivors away so that they could be incarcerated and enslaved. And as the last pack animal was burning to death on the floor, Vikinger looked on, enjoying a biffer with total indifference. If you would like to see more crazy content like this, then please subscribe for more war crimes in the future. If you have any suggestions for future videos, then please write them in the comment section below, as I try my very best to respond to every comment personally. I have to say, it's absolutely awesome seeing so much positive feedback for these videos, so cheers for all the support, folks. If you could hit that like button, then that would be super helpful. And last but not least, don't forget to hit that bell icon when you subscribe, as we release content fairly often. And on that, I'll see you in the next one.